need to know a play before you see a play? Should theatre tickets warn that attendees are responsible for doing their own pre-read, maybe highlighting previous productions that may be worth seeing beforehand? This question came to mind at the opening of what we're told is a landmark production of Othello, now playing at the National Theatre's Littleton. Landmark is an interesting choice of word. It gives this production an assumed place in the future history of famed Othellos. As a goal, it is somewhat appropriate for a production that seems resolutely focused on the play's past. How he reacts to this Othello, which here is the first time it's had a black director in the Deputy Artistic Director of the National Theatre, Clint Dyer, will depend very much on what you bring with you from your historic knowledge of the play and other productions. Dyer says this contemporary production will subvert the traditional stagings that we know so well. His use of the first person plural here says much, the assumption being that clearly we are all coming to the party from an equal standing point, that we all have the same knowledge of the same traditional stagings mentioned. With this context, you may notice the harsh lighting, the projected film, and the costume colouring, even the casting choices. Giles Terera as Othello is the only black actor in the cast. Such things metaphorically and literally give this production a sense of blackness, which is made clearer when looking against historic iterations. For those who are not part of this rather closed group, such things may be little more than aesthetics. If, God forbid, this is your first Othello, prepare to be left somewhat underwhelmed when looking for the substance underneath this style. Dyer seems to favour theatrical construct over basic storytelling. It is hard to believe the often perplexing and hole-ridden plot of Othello. The look may be modern enough, but the story is left stereotypically Shakespeare, and that's not meant in a good way. Before the play starts, we see images projected onto the empty stage. Years flash on and off over them: 1791, 1914, 1883, 2005. A stagehand looks at us as he slowly sweeps away at nothing. Look closely and you see the images of the posters from previous productions of Othello. You see the faces, the white faces of Orson, Wells, Lawrence, Olivier. No reason for the staccato there. It tells us that the production that is about to follow is firmly set in the now, that is never far from the Othellos of the past. Dyer approaches modernity largely through symbols. Those attending with Othello on their A-level reading list are given plenty of symbols to write about later. In the ever-present chorus who celebrate and decry Othello in an instant. Recognisable from subtle but clear ignored handshakes between races. Visible but unmentioned scars on Othello's back. Bruises painted on the face of Emilia, assumedly given by Iago. These all show Dyer to be a very clever director. But what about the text? The real challenge any director has with Othello is the story itself. Though there are none of the usual Shakespeare tropes, no witches, ghosts or fairies, no cases of mistaken identity or gender swapping, the characters themselves are drawn weakly. There is no reason for their relationships or friendships or the trust that has grown. Such problems have been overlooked here. The gaps instead are simply covered over by the wrapping paper of intellectual theatricality. So when Paul Hilton's Iago says twice that he hates Othello, he sounds like a child telling us they hate the vegetables on their plate. It seems a win, though Rosie McEwen gives her Desdemona a feistiness that makes her seem much more of an equal to Othello. Her simple acceptance of her fate later then just seems out of character. And it's difficult to see the power of Shakespeare's infamous green-eyed monster working through Othello's mind to make him mad. Terera takes him from passively declaring love to Desdemona one minute, and the next, wild, insane anger appears almost mid-sentence and then stays there for the duration. The text is delivered technically well for the most part. The words are easy to understand. What's missing is any feeling of humanity beneath them. These are the only three actors with characters deemed important enough to be their only role. We forget most of the others in the cast as they are discarded alongside their costume by the actors who then take their place in the faceless chorus. The chorus, named without subtlety as the system, sit around the amphitheatre central to the set. Wearing black, sometimes masked, sometimes as puppets, they watch the action take place. They sometimes mime. Do they represent wider society? Are they the morally bankrupt majority? Are they the counsellors predisposed to make judgment on society and bring people down to their own level? I don't know. Maybe. They do give the staging some depth and are interesting to look at, but their presence has no impact on the events that take place. They're only nods to us intellectually to consider. Likely intended as a comment on modern life, it really appears to be little more than director's trickery. The same gimmick could be added to any production of almost any other play. And it is really just that, a gimmick. It's possible, of course, that the system represents something altogether different, often appearing to silently applaud or laugh during Iago's many speeches to audience. I wondered if perhaps there's a backstory where Iago had once been a comedian, and these were his memories of the audiences he played to in various working men's clubs up and down Greece. Okay, it's far-fetched, and maybe not in Shakespeare's mind when writing, but it would explain why this Iago is played like a camp pantomime villain, for whom Hilton seems to be channeling the spirit of Terry Thomas. His sidling on stage cries out for us to boo and hiss. His acts of wickedness just seem to miss the flourish of a knowing wink. Hilton may or may not really twist his moustache with his little finger outstretched as he contemplates his evil plans, but that's the picture I have in my head.
Jolly good? Rather.
This lack of depth to the actual text and characters comes to fruition in the final bloodbath, the tragedy of the tragedy. It bears no tension. Instead of using swords, attackers and defenders carry daggers that are no longer than the palm of their hands. They could be butter knives. There's lots of close hand thrusting, which makes the ensuing fight more like a group of Camp Morris dancers fighting over the last sausage roll. The deaths are the type from which the Shakespearean cliché is born. One person dies, then isn't dead, then dies again, then manages one final line with their last breath. And still, they have time to sing a bar or two of a song remembered from childhood. Such things may seem immaterial. It's what Shakespeare wrote and it's what we're used to, so we're stuck with it. But I don't buy that. I suggest it demonstrates a probably subconscious theatrical snobbery at play. The play itself is left untouched, assumed perhaps to be understood because it is Shakespeare, and we all know and respect Shakespeare, right? It's as though by striving to carve a place for itself against previous interpretations, Dyer may have forgotten those whose lives don't revolve around theatre. He's looked at the play, but not the audience. What he has may be a landmark in history, but history is already in the past.